Hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Vikas and I will be your technical assistant for today's webinar. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, please make sure that you have your audio and video turned off to avoid any background noise or distraction during the webinar. Second, if you have any questions or comments during the presentation in the webinar, you can use the chat function to send them to us, and we will do our best to address them during the webinar or at the end in question and answer session. Finally, if you have any technical difficulties, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My name is Vikas. You can find me in the chat. Thank you again for joining, and I hope you have a great time learning today. Without any further ado, I would like to hand over to our main speaker, Mr. Santan Sindhu. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Vikas. Let me just share my screen to begin with. Maximize my screen. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. Like Vikas said, hopefully you find today's session informative. A little bit of a introduction about myself. My name is Sam. I run the analytics and engineering practice for Positka. We are, of course, a cybersecurity firm primarily. Along with me today, we also have Vikesh. Vikesh is one of our SIM and SOAR architects. He has done a number of deployments both on the security monitoring and incident response side of things. So he's worked with quite a few platforms. Hopefully, what we go through today with you is something that helps you with what you are doing in your own organizations. So without further ado, let's get started. In terms of the agenda for today, I think you might have seen this already, of course. We want to talk a little bit about the challenges. Typically, I think there's usually a bit of a doubt or confusion in people's mind about what is the difference between automation vis-a-vis SOAR, how do they differ? Then many of you, I'm assuming, are coming from a security operations background, or you are looking to set up some kind of security monitoring or response in your organizations. So what are some of the things you might want to think about? I'll talk about a couple of use cases also, more of a case study, before I hand it over to Vikesh, and Vikesh will actually do a more detailed demo of one of the use cases that we talk about. So like Vikas mentioned at the opening, please do feel free to ask questions anytime during the session, and we would be happy to answer. In terms of, I guess, the preamble, I think we all know now that security operations or SecOps is becoming more and more relevant in today's day and age. If you look at the timeline below, for example, this is a nice visual that depicts how there has been a evolution in how adversaries or malicious players are targeting organizations, be it in the commercial space or even in the personal space for that matter. So the number of breaches, the number of records that are being stolen, the number of successful attacks versus the number of total attacks. Vikesh, you might want to go on mute, Vikesh.
Yeah.
Or Victor, you might want to mute yourself if that's okay. Yeah, there you go. So I think the number of incidents is going on increasing. So that's something that's becoming prevalent. And I think one interesting trend that's come out, which is I think fairly recent, last 5-10 years, is that as opposed to, I guess, more of the individual, the consumer level attacks, it's more about targeted enterprise incidents, because the value that you get from attacking an enterprise by breaching an enterprise is, of course, far higher than if you target an individual person or a consumer. Now, from the perspective of the security team, what are some of the challenges that they face across, I think, the whole world? This is a global issue, not just related to any one geography or any one region. So one is, of course, the number of alerts. So there are typically in large organizations, thousands of alerts that keep coming out. And to manage these thousands of alerts, you actually don't have sufficient people. If you're running a security operations center, you'll need security engineers, you'll need threat hunters, you'll need L1, L2, L3 resources, you'll need a SOC manager. So there are you might need forensics experts, for example, if you have a breach. So the number of staff you have to run an efficient SOC is nowhere near where it should be. So that in conjunction with the high volume of alerts is becoming a very challenging situation for most organizations. Uh, in addition, these security professionals have to deal with many siloed products. So in most organizations, typically you might have anywhere between 15 to 30 siloed products. Even if you look at firewall, for example, you might have Checkpoint, you might have Palo Alto, you might have 40. If you talk about your servers, you might have Windows or Linux servers, you might have Solaris servers, which are being monitored by different tools. You might have proxy, you might have different CASB, CSPM solutions. So there's a lot of different solutions that typically you'll work with. I've seen typically even in most organizations now, you don't have one EDR, you'll have multiple EDR. You might have CrowdStrike, you might have Symantec, you might have Trend Micro, you might have Sentinel. You'll have a mixture of devices, and all of them again add to the fatigue that is faced by security professionals in the SOC team. Many times the process maturity of the SOC itself is not where it should be. So the team is not clear, the individuals are not clear about how do they deal with some of the incidents that happen, some of the alerts that get reported. And from an organization perspective, again, the speed is important, of course, in terms of how you address the alerts that are coming through. So if you look at the bottom here, for example, the average number of days to complete an investigation is 4+ days. This was a couple of years back. The numbers only going up. And what that means is that, again, for that duration of time, the organization is unprotected. And again, from again the analyst point of view, they are stuck with the cumbersome task of doing the same thing over and over again, day in and day out. So again, there's a lot of monotony that creeps into the job that the SOC analysts do. So that's also very painful. So from a SecOps perspective, these are some of the common challenges that I think that are observed. Now, what is the impact of all of those challenges? There are some interesting findings here that I've put in here from a recent report. So a group of around 1,000 analysts was interviewed globally by IBM and their consulting partner. Now, the first chart that you see here is actually very interesting. It says that close to 46% of respondents are saying that the time to detect and respond to a security incident has increased. You would expect that with the number of tools and the growing automation, the time to respond should decrease, but here it's actually going up from what is seen out in the industry. The second key insight that you get is many of the threats that are manually reviewed are typically false positives. So they are not something that are very actionable, but even then, many of them end up being false positives. The time that you spend investigating whether a threat is actually a true positive or something that needs to be actioned is 32%, just to validate whether it's a real threat or not. And as a result of this validation, what happens is that in a day, if you're supposed to get 100 alerts, you end up reviewing only 14 alerts. So the remaining 50 odd alerts become backlog that you sort of go to the next day. So the longer, and this actually goes back to the previous slide where we said that there's a backlog that comes in where the number of alerts that you need to investigate keep piling up, which means that the risk exposure of the organization is ever increasing as those alerts remain untriaged. So this is the current state of play or the current state of the industry with regards to SecOps in most places. And this is where I think automation comes in. And now, of course, what we're talking about is more about SOAR. So SOAR and automation come in because of some of these challenges that we are seeing out in the industry. Now, what does SOAR actually stand for? Stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response, for those who were not aware earlier. Now, the core or the crux or the heart of your SOAR system is basically the fact that it is able to automate a lot of the actions that you do. Now, what do you mean by automation? It could be a script that's running and hitting against some other system. Could be based on APIs, could be based on some kind of scripting language that you're writing. As long as there's an interface to any other system, be it a firewall, be it a EDR system, be it some kind of proxy, could be your MDMs. You are essentially using your source system to integrate with these external systems, and then you are trying to automate some of the actions that you would trigger manually. So that is the very core, very basic premise of a SOAR platform. But by itself, automation is not enough, because you could always make the case that, hey, I can write a script on my own in Python, or I can write a shell script to do this. Why do I need a SOAR tool for that? The answer is because it's not only automation. What you want to do is you want to do orchestration. When I say orchestration, you're actually creating a logical flow, or you're creating a logical workflow through the concept of something called playbooks, where you're encapsulating all of the steps that you want to do in a entity within your SOAR platform. So this allows you to create a fairly complex sequence of operations that say that, hey, if I get some kind of a malware detected alert from my CrowdStrike console, then what I want to do is I want to take this, I want to go to my SIEM, I want to see if other machines are also infected. If more than 10 machines are infected, then maybe then it's malware outbreak. I need to escalate this immediately. I need to see if it's localized to one segment or multiple segments. I need to shut down that segment. So there's a complex chain of reasoning that you might go through manually. You are using playbooks and runbooks to automate and then orchestrate the action that happens within those different automation scripts. And finally, the response part of it is, of course, if you get hit with some kind of a alert, or you get hit with some kind of an incident, you need to maintain the case history so that in the future, if you're doing a post-incident review, or else in case even if it gets escalated to legal authorities, if there's a breach, you are maintaining a chain of custody about what happened. You're able to communicate with your colleagues. You're able to use a single tool for managing everything that's going on. So from a response perspective also, the SOAR tool acts as a single place of origin for all your actions with the systems that are involved here. And the next slide actually is talking about, okay, once you understand what SOAR is doing, now what are the key use cases or the functions that you would perform with SOAR? So you'd essentially do automation, of course, we spoke about that. You do orchestration, but in addition to that, you also want to make sure you're able to collaborate with your team. You're able to do event management. You're able to do case management. And last but not least, you're also able to look at reporting and metrics. So what was the mean time to respond? How is the team doing? Who's loaded? Who's not? All of those things, right? So from a SOC perspective, if you want to operationalize your SOAR implementation, these are some of the things that you want to look at. So I'll pause here before I move on to the next section. Are there any questions that anyone might have? Please feel free to type questions that you might have in the chat box. Okay, so there's a question here that is around whether the SOAR platform supports a cloud native deployment. So there are two ways, I guess, to look at this question. So one is all your systems are in the cloud. Can you deploy SOAR? The other way to look at this question could be, can you deploy SOAR as a cloud-based system instead of a traditional on-prem? So answer, I guess, to both is that SOAR can be deployed in all configurations. In today's day and age, there are multiple vendors or products out there on SOAR. All of them typically offer the option of both an on-premise deployment, where you sort of get the software and then you set it up, configure it in your environment. The other option is that there are typically SaaS-based offerings available as well. So you can buy it, buy the subscription, then you can configure it. There might be elements of the platform that are still deployed in your environment, some connectors, but you can still do it. From the other perspective, which is, can you integrate with cloud native systems where you have a lot of SaaS, IaaS platforms or data sources? Answer there is again yes. So SOAR platforms are designed to be very, very easily integrable with pretty much any kind of system, as long as there is an interface there. Thank you for that question, Saran. I guess I'll just move on then. So building a next-gen SOC with SOAR. So if you're sort of a SOC analyst or a SOC manager or a security lead, and then you're trying to figure out why do you need SOAR, or do you even need SOAR? I guess the question is, when does that decision come in? So there's something called the OODA cycle that's actually represented on this slide. So OODA stands for observe, orient, make a decision, and then act on it, right? So in all organizations, big or small, and whatever the state of maturity, typically you'll have some sensors that are deployed in your environment. Could be firewalls, EDRs, WAFs, proxies. You could have malware detection sandboxes, could be anything. All of those will typically be flowing into some kind of control system that you have. So control system would typically be one of the key things you'll have is an SIEM. You might have threat intel platforms. You might have a risk and compliance platform. You might have a data warehouse. So you'll have some control systems into which this data is feeding. Now, from the control systems, essentially, you're going to get a lot of alerts that get triggered. Now, this is where traditionally this comes to your SOC team or your SOC analyst. And at the moment, most organizations, they still have a manual workflow where they'll have to validate the alerts, they'll have to write up some kind of a report, then they start responding. And after they respond, they'll have to document what they did also. And all of this is most times a manual process. Now, what kind of responses do they do? They might uh, change your firewall configuration, they might take action on your endpoints through EDRs, they might look at the signatures in IDS, IPS as part of their investigation. So there's any number of things that they can do depending on the SOPs or standard operating procedures that are written. So when you talk about the SOAR systems, where they fit in is the latter half typically of your system. So you still have your control systems in place and they're still sending out the alerts. But now instead of having your analysts manually triage all of that and try to take action based on manual procedures that are written in SOPs, you want to try and you want to try and automate that whole process of taking action. Now, the level of autonomy that you generate is actually up to you. You can still control that. But ultimately, this is where the SOAR system comes into place and then starts adding value to your organization. Now, some questions that you might want to ask yourself also, or your organization might want to ask yourself is, hey, am I ready for a SOAR now? Am I ready to invest in a SOAR project? Am I ready to invest in the tool? Am I ready to invest in the number of resources I need to commit to making this a success? So I think there are two ways to look at it. I think one is the state of maturity of your control system, primarily the SIM, and the state of maturity of your overall operation, the processes that you have in place. So some of the questions you might want to ask yourself, for example, is what are the number of alerts that you're getting per day? If you're just getting 2-3 alerts a day, for example, it might really not make sense for you to do so. If you're getting hundreds of alerts and most of them are false positive and you're struggling with triaging that because you don't have enough people, then yes, it's a good. It might make good business sense to consider putting in a SOAR platform, for example. So do you have dedicated SIM engineers? How many data sources are integrated? So I think all of those to some extent play into informing the complexity of your organizational technology footprint. And based on that, you'll have a point of view about whether it makes sense to invest in a SOAR or not. The second part of it is around the operations part of it. Now, you might be getting a lot of alerts, but do you have SOPs in place already for key alerts? SOAR is basically just automation. So how can you automate something if you don't know what you want to do with automation, right? So do you have current metrics around the time and effort that you take to close efforts? If you don't have a baseline of how much time you're spending now, how will you quantify the benefits you get after doing a SOAR implementation? So do you already have some kind of an ITSM tool in place, for example, for managing alerts? SOAR tools are good for case management, but might not be the best for collaboration between your firewall team, your server team, your compliance team, your legal team, and all. So do you have tools around that? Right? So there are, again, a lot of questions that you want to answer around the operations status of your organization also. Now, once you have a better understanding of these elements, there are typically three things that can happen in terms of your readiness level. So one could be that you might realize that, look, my SIM or my SOC is not mature yet. So even if I invest in a SOAR right now, I might not derive the value from it. So maybe my focus should be more on optimizing the SIM or the SOC operations first. So once I have tried to optimize it to the best extent possible based on the constraints I have, that is when I start thinking about a SOAR. The second thing that might happen is you might say, hey, I've got a world-class SIEM that's working well. It's just that my SOC is not able to deal with it. I need to figure it out. So in that case, you might want to start with SOAR on a smaller scale. You sort of figure out those low-hanging fruit, which gives you most bang for the buck, most value, and then you pick that up. Or you might say, hey, my SIM is sort of okay, but my SOC is really mature. They are able to do as much as they can given the constraint. Now I want to move to the next level. So in that case, again, it might make sense to identify the places where SOAR can add value and get started with that. The best case is, of course, that both your SIM and SOC are very mature. In this case, ideally, I would say your organization should really consider doing a big bang approach where you do a detailed assessment or study of your current metrics, your current workflows, your current alert volumes, and look at building a business case around what is your current baseline, and from there, what is the potential you have to go to a more optimized workflow, and what is the savings you will get from that if you use something like a SOAR. So that's one way, or one perspective around how to look at whether you should even invest your time and effort and resources into doing a SOAR deployment. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about SOAR use cases next before I hand it over to Vikesh for a more detailed demo. But I'll pause in case there are any other questions to be answered. I think there was one question from Mohanty, and Vikesh has answered that. So that's wonderful. Now, talking about a SOAR use case. Now, before I talk about SOAR use cases, I think I wanted to set up a little bit of a preamble also to the demo also. So there are many SIM and SOAR products in the marketplace, of course. Typically, as an organization, we tend to prefer working with Gartner vendors. So some of the tools you might hear are things that you might have in your organization. So Splunk, Securix, IBM, Microsoft Sentinel. All these are things you should ideally have in place. There are many others, of course. You might have Logarithm, Sumo Logic, doesn't matter, but typically you want to make sure you have a SIM in place. Again, from a SOAR perspective, there are quite a few vendors out there. So the ones that we as an organization work with primarily are Splunk SOAR, D3, Cortex XOR, which is from Palo Alto. So for today's session, I'll be focusing more on Splunk SOAR because we work with Splunk quite a lot. When Vikesh does a demo later, he will also focus on Splunk SOAR. But in terms of a lot of the concepts that we're talking about, it is very common across all of these vendors. Even if it's FortiSIM, for example, or any other SOAR that you're talking about, the concept will be very similar. But for today's purpose, we'll be focused more on Splunk SOAR as a technology. Now, the first use case I want to talk about very, very briefly, this is something that Vikesh will again take you through in a lot more detail, so I won't spend too much time here, is phishing. Phishing is actually one of the most common SOAR use cases, one of the first things that are implemented at most organizations. And it's a fairly standard workflow, but there are differences in the way different organizations implement their workflow. So because of that, there'll be always some kind of deviations. So in your manual process, what happens is that once an email comes in, your security analyst has to basically check your IOCs. They have to collect the context from all the different systems, including SIM. They might have to use some kind of a sandbox to detonate the file and then see what comes back before they actually take action. And then again, even the actions that they take are all going to be manual. So that's what typically happens. But when you talk about SOAR, for example, it becomes a lot more streamlined. So your email, essentially, your email box gets integrated with SOAR, and then you are defining within SOAR that whatever actions you were doing manually earlier, you want to make sure that all of them happen instantaneously, more or less, using the automation capabilities of the tool. And then from there, even if you want to sort of take action, so you can ask it to raise tickets, you can ask it to assign severities, you can ask it to send emails, and typically the analyst can either be someone who's informed, or the analyst can even be sitting somewhere here to approve or disapprove any action that are happening. So this is something that Vikesh will go through in more detail, so I won't spend more time on this, but this is one of the most standard use cases out there. I will actually spend maybe a minute or two before I hand it off now to Vikesh. This is something that's a little more unique, something that we haven't seen very, very frequently, but I want to share with the group because this will give you a better understanding of what are the more sophisticated use cases you might want to indulge in if your organization is large enough or it has complex enough use cases. So this kind of a use case, for example, at the end of this discussion, you'll I guess appreciate that it's difficult to achieve something like this without having a SOAR tool in place. So the customer in this case that we worked with had a large Splunk SIM installation, quite a complex environment, multi-terabyte. They actually had Jira for their ITSM tool, and as most people will know, of course, Jira is a good ITSM tool, but not necessarily a great SecOps ticket management or alert management tool. Now, they wanted to sort of get control over the tickets that were coming out to Jira. Now, there were some very, very specific, there was a specific workflow that was laid out. So for each SIM alert, there was a need to perform the initial investigation. Then this is where it became interesting. The result of the investigation needed to be formatted into a very particular format and then sent out to Jira. And then there was a need to check for duplicate alerts also. So to allow for throttling. So if a similar ticket had been created about 10 times in the past hour, then they wanted to create a parent-child relationship and then not create a new ticket for that. So this is again one more thing that the SOAR was expected to do. I will show the end outcome here, what finally came out of the system. So the final output, if you see here again, it is a Jira ticket. So here it's, for example, FireEye Helix indicator hit detected on host. Now, if you look at the details within the ticket, this is what came out from Splunk SOAR. So it's doing its IP address triage, is doing the who it's sort of doing all of that investigation upfront the moment the ticket hits, and it's giving it to you in this nice tabular flow. So all that the analyst has to do essentially is come in here and then start working and reaching out to the different systems. So this is the end outcome that was achieved. Now, how was this achieved? I mean, what you see here again, I won't go into the details of all of this. You can take a look at this later once Vikas shares the slides. But again, this is actually the overall workflow or the overall workbook, as we call it. So there's one master workbook, but if you notice, there are lots of chunks here. I've highlighted some of them. So here, for example, each of them by itself is a playbook, which has its own set of logic. So here, for example, you have something called a rate limiter. This is where you're checking to see if you hit the threshold of more than 10. Here, you are talking about creating the ticket with Jira. And here, actually, you're doing all of your IOC extraction, the enrichment, the investigation and all. And again, each one of them by itself, it's got a lot of logic that's defined. In this case, again, it is literally a function of what does the SecOps team want. Unless the SecOps team is clear about how they want the logic to work, SOAR cannot perform it. So here, what is the logic for rate limiting? Then when you do ticket creation again, what is the sequence and what is the format of the name that you create for the alert? When you talk about the utilities, you want to do the domain triage, hash triage, address triage. What are all the things that you want to do? You want to find related tickets. So all of them, again, as you can see here, there's a lot of detail that goes into it, which goes back to my earlier point that unless your organization is at a maturity level where they have a understanding of what is it that they want to do, it will be difficult to build out these kinds of complex workflows, which is where you will really get the value, because all of these things will fall through and happen in a matter of moments, as opposed to analyst having to do 10-15 minutes or spend 10-15 minutes of their time to get this done. So that's a little bit about, I guess, the use cases that can be done with SOAR, both the standard phishing one, and then this is something that's not run of the mill, slightly more difficult, slightly more different. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Vikesh to actually do the actual live demo. Over to you.
Sorry to interrupt, Sam. We have a few polls. I mean, before going to the demo part, can we do the polling here?
Yeah, sure, because you want to do the poll.
Let me start the poll. Yeah. So I think the poll is visible to everyone. Please do respond. Yeah, I think people are still voting.
Okay, we'll give it about 5 seconds, and then we'll close the poll. Yeah. Okay. I think most people are agreeing about the fact that things will be better automated. I'm surprised one person disagrees, so it will be interesting to hear his perspective, his or her perspective. But okay, I think the polls are done, right? Because everyone can see the results, I'm assuming.
Yes, everyone can see that. Yeah, it's it.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, shall we move on to the demo now? Because I think we are already a little over time, so might want to get back to the demo.
Definitely.
Okay, Vikesh, over to you.
So thank you so much, Sam, for your wonderful presentation, nurturing the importance of SOAR and its functionalities. So before I share my screen for the demo, let me introduce myself. So my name is Vikesh. I've been working with Positka for 3+ years. So I do a lot of work around the security product suite like Splunk Enterprise Security and SOAR. I am a Splunk co-certified consultant. So where we'll be doing most of architecting and implementation of Splunk solution. That's a small brief about myself. Let me share my screen. I'm Vikash. Let me know if you were able to see my screen.
Yes, Vikesh can see it.
Okay, great. So yes, as Sam already emphasized, the purpose of SOAR. Let me reiterate once again. So the benefit or main purpose of SOAR is to improve the organization's security and better manage the risk. In terms of orchestrating or automating the process which are done manually for the investigation response. So in this demo, basically, I'll be doing a Splunk SOAR platform, so which is a market-leading security orchestration automation tool. I would like to, in the presentation, we saw some complex playbooks and other things, but, I just want to make it very simple. And, I want yourself be very comfortable what the SOAR platform can able to do with very common scenarios like a phishing. So I will showcase you, how individual actions can be automated, how a sophisticated process can be put in place, which helps us in terms of spending less time for manual repetitive work. No, this is not just for a solution implementation for cybersecurity. It is also one of the important factors, in terms of resource utilization. So this SOAR platform, the automation orchestration, everything will be helping the security analyst to focus on more valuable incidents rather than doing some repetitive process on their day-to-day life. So the screen, what we see here is the main dashboard. We call it as a main screen for SOAR platform. On the top, you can see some metrics. So these are basically the ROI summary. So ROI, nothing but, what is the benefit that we get out of the SOAR platform? So these are all some of the metrics that can be configured. So this is a demo environment. So you do see some random numbers here. So ideally, you can configure the, FT, number of FTEs that will be spending on investigation process, and what is the number of actions that you do perform over a minute. Based on those configurations and calculations, Splunk SOAR can help us understand how many hours that can be saved and what is the estimation of dollars in savings. Below, we have some more panels here, which will help understand about what's happening inside the SOAR. So here we see some of the open containers and what is the workload here, who are the users currently running any actions or automations, what are the status of the events, like, whether it is resolved or unresolved. And then you can see some top playbooks and actions, what are the playbooks that are executed and what are the actions that are executed, and what are the data sources that are coming to the SOAR platform. So there are some additional metrics which will help us to understand the functionality and performance of the SOAR platform. Yes, so we can see the number of incoming data sources, resolved events, is there any SLA breaches? So you might be already familiar with the context or word event. So in Splunk, we call it as a container. So when an event is ingested into Splunk SOAR, we call it as a container. It's just it's an event, but we call it as container in SOAR. And there are some more panels here which will help us to understand the number of artifacts counts, what the performance, and how many other active and total playbooks. So that's about the main screen and dashboard. So before I move on from the screen, I want to talk about the sources, the data sources. So SOAR activity starts with the data sources. So we call it as, data ingestion. So, we need to have the containers, like events in terms of the SOAR to perform the automation and orchestration capabilities. So we call it as, data ingestion in SOAR. These data sources can be either way. So it can be structured data can be ingested. So when I talk about structured data, it can be the events or incidents or notables that are coming from your SIEM. In this example, I would say Splunk Enterprise Security, where you will generate a lot of notables and you can ingest those notables into the SOAR platform, where you can do the investigation and triage process. And also, you can also ingest unstructured data. So unstructured data here, what I'm trying to explain is that if you have any other security tools outside of SIM, like you have Office 365, you have a Sentinel, so where you can able to ingest the events as well. So those events will be ingested. Those events will be ingested in terms of standard key value format, which I will show you in just a minute. So these so getting the event apart from SIEM, right? For example, Office 365. So these are happening through an application, basically an app integration. So we will talk about the app integration later in the demo. So this is the sources. So how sources work? The sources, you can get the structured data from the SIEM tool and unstructured data from any other third-party security solutions. So most of the data integration works with the REST API functionality, and Splunk SOAR has a fully compatible REST API functionality. With that, you can able to onboard any CSV files or custom data databases into your SOAR platform. Okay, so from now, we would like to focus on three key elements. So the first would be the apps, the second would be the mission control, and third would be the playbook. So apps, you might already be familiar, it is a gateway for the integration between the Splunk SOAR platform and your security tools and services. Mission control, I will walk you through later in the section. So that's just a user hub where the collaboration activity between the analysts can be performed. And third, playbook, a playbook or nothing but just codifying the repeatable process. Okay, so when we talk about the apps, I just want to pull up Splunk SOAR has a library of more than 300 plus apps, very wide open, flexible, and extensible, which will help us quickly install and integrate with any of our security tools and technologies. So it offers a very wide variety of tools and technologies. Basically each app that we see here is basically a Python module in the backend, which will contain the necessary code for the successful integration between your SOAR platform and the security tools and services. So most of it, most of the apps are integrated through some REST API functionality. Of the apps, the main elements are like a connector.py. So this is where you will define all the Python codes, Python codes and endpoints. And there will be some constants.py. So where you will define all the endpoints. Like, if you want to get the data from any REST endpoint or API, so you can define those variables in one of the scripts, which in Phantom app we call it as constants.py. Here we can define all the endpoints from where we want to hit and get the data from. So this is it. Splunk SOAR apps is open source. It is available in GitHub. You can able to download the open source, and if you want to perform any modifications, you can do that. Saying that 30% of the SOAR apps are contributed by the partners, vendors, and the customers. So what I mean by modifying the app. So for example, let's assume you have a Fortinet app, for example. This Fortinet app will help us to perform some actions on the Fortinet firewall. Basically, you can do block IP. So block IP is nothing but if you find something vulnerable, malicious, and if you want to block the IP on your firewall devices, you can use this app to integrate and run this action to do that. So by default, if I look into the documentation for the apps, you can very clearly see that it updates the block IP on the destination, not on the source. So if you want to update the same on the source, you can modify the app. It's very easy. You can use the GUI functionality to modify the code in the app, and you can publish. Basically, if you want to improvise the app, that's also possible. You can publish to the community, and then everyone gets benefited. So that's how Splunk SOAR is very flexible and open in terms of customizations. Okay, so now let's look into one of the app. I will say Office. Let's look into the Office app. Okay. So now we look into the Office 365 app. So this app supports many actions that it can perform. For example, it can do on-polling of the mails from any one of the mailbox. It can do the tracing of email. It can get email address, list address. It can move email, delete email. So these are the list of actions that this app supports. Okay, so also want to highlight, for example, if in your organizations, if you are using any proprietary in-house legacy tools, and if that security tool has some sort of providing integration with any other third-party solutions, then you can build a custom app in SOAR. There's a very extensive documentation on how to build a application on a Splunk SOAR. So if you can see, there's an app wizard. So just clicking on the app wizard will take you to a very generic GUI where you can just input your name of the app, description, name of the vendor or the name, and if you want to have some logos of it, you can add. So once you have all of this, and then you may need to configure some Python coding, Python coding for establishing the connectivity between the source solution and your security tool. And then, basically the GUI or the front face of the app is a JSON format. 80% of the thing will be JSON format in the Python code. And you may need to do some sort of custom coding. Additionally, reason is that, it's okay, you're doing the integration and you're getting the data into Splunk SOAR platform. And how do you format the data? If you want to format the data and make it usable, then you may need to do some sort of custom coding, basically Python, in terms of formatting data. So that's it. It's very simple to create a custom app in SOAR platform for any of your tools that you want to do out of the box. So every single app needs to be configured with an assert. So assert are nothing but specific details that we need to provide to the app. This will establish the communication between the SOAR app and your security platform. So basically, typically it would be like username, assert, or if you want to provide API keys, those sort of configurations. So that's what assert. So assert will initiate the connectivity between your SOAR platform onto your security tools. Once the asset is configured, you will have the connection established. Then you can perform all these actions what we see here. This is how the app's asserts action work in Splunk SOAR platform. So let me take a pause here to see if there are any questions before I move on to the next. So just want to ask you a quick question. So are there any specific apps or tools that you use on your daily basis that we can quickly check whether we have it in SOAR platform or not? Okay, so you want to ship a fish tank and abuse IP? Let's take a look. Yes, we have an app for fish tank, and we should also have for abuse IPTV. Yeah, so it's that we have unconfigured. So most of the popular security tools and services, we have apps out of the box in Splunk SOAR. If in case you don't find the app for your requirement, you can use the custom app wizard for developing one. That's all. Okay, so now let's jump into an example of the phishing event and how we can able to automate a response. So in Splunk SOAR, there's a concept called labels. So labels are nothing but classification of events. So for example, if you're getting the events ingested from your email mailbox, so then you can classify those events as email label. If you're getting events from your SIEM like Splunk, you can label it as Splunk events. So these labels are very important and it contributes how the playbook can be executed on the events. So let's example, you have a playbook built and you want to run it only against the label email, meaning that you have a phishing playbook developed and you want that phishing playbook to be run executed against only the emails that are ingested. In that case, you want to map it playbook to the label, which is email. So that's the importance of having labels in your SOAR platform. So let me go through the email label since we want to take a look into an example of phishing. Okay, so in this example, right, we are ingesting the mails from a centralized mailbox where the user think that some of the emails that they see in their inbox are suspicious or malicious. They are forwarding to centralized mailbox, and that centralized mailbox has been integrated using that Office 365 app, and those events are created as containers into the SOAR platform. So this is an example of a container. So clicking on that container, basically an event, will take us to this view. This is the mission control. So mission control is nothing but kind of an hub for user collaboration, where the analyst can step in and do some sort of analysis, investigation, or if they want to add some notes, they can do that. So there are two views here. One is summary, another one is analyst. Summary is kind of an overview. So here you cannot able to execute any actions, whereas you can able to identify what has been done, what has been run, what automations has been run against this container. And if you want, for example, if you're a SOC analyst and if you want to execute some actions, or if you want to take a look what actions have been executed or what automations have been performed, then you can navigate to the analyst view. So here on the left, you can able to see the activity. So whatever actions that you perform, you can able to see it here. And then you have some workbooks. If you have any custom workbooks built, then you will see it here. And here, if you go to the artifact section, here is where you will see all the information. So as I mentioned, right, Splunk SOAR ingests the information in standard key value format. So we see here from the email mailbox, we have ingested a container of suspicious mail. From that, we see an artifact creator, like fish sender domain. There's an email artifact, and there is a other artifacts. Let me Okay, so we see a sender domain, we see an email artifact, we see a domain artifact, we see a URL artifact, we see a vault artifact. All these informations are extracted from the email, which the user forwarded to the centralized mailbox. So let's assume, you have a SOC operations and you have employees who are sending the phishing emails to a centralized mailbox, and the SOC analyst needs to step in and investigate the process. So how cumbersome is that? For example, if there are, let's assume there are 100 phishing emails that the employees are getting received, and they are forwarding to the SOC mailbox. So it's a cumbersome process, right? You may need to go into each of the mail, and you may need to check for the email headers. You may need to check for if there are any files present, hyperlinks present, or is there any attachments. You ideally will be surfing other different tools to see whether it's a legitimate or suspicious or malicious email kind of phishing act or not. And then you may need to go back to the user saying that this is a phishing email, you may need to delete it from your inbox, or you can advise them this is not a phishing email, you can ignore. So all this is a kind of cumbersome and manual process. Let's see how we can able to automate that in SOAR platform. Okay, so see all this information is extracted from the mail. You want to take some actions against one of the artifacts. For example, here we see a request URL artifact. So on the very right, you can able to see a drop icon. Clicking on that, it will take us to this pop-up where we can able to see the overview, the criticality of that event or severity of the event, like low, critical, medium, high. And if I want to execute any actions on this request URL parameter, which is extracted from the email, I can quickly go to the run action, and you can see investigate. Splunk SOAR will help us to understand what actions that you can run against this OC, basically the request URL. For this artifact, I need to I want to check the URL reputation. So I'll simply go to the investigate, and I can see the URL reputation. I can simply choose that. It will automatically take us to the pre-configured assets or apps. So I will choose VirusTotal. So there are other apps also configured which you might use. So for this demo, I'm using VirusTotal. For example, if you have a paid subscription to your recorded feature, you can use that to analyze the reputations. So by simply clicking the launch, the action is executed, and you should be able to see it on your left screen on the activity pane that the user initiated a URL reputation, and you can able to see the results here. So what you see here is that out of 71 total scans has been flagged as positives, which means this is a malicious. You can either see the activity in the left pane, or you can scroll down. You have the widget here, the widget as well as you can see. So this is the URL against which we did the reputation, and these are total scans and what is the positives. So now I understand that this is kind of a malicious. I want to take some actions. Maybe possibly I need to block this URL in my web proxy server so that it doesn't happen again, or intentionally if any of the user clicks on this particular URL doesn't harm. So for that, what I want to do, I will again go to this artifact, which is the request URL, and I can run one more action. So now I want to block the URL in my web proxy server. So that will be under the contain. So if I just expand the contain, I can see block URL. Okay. If you just block URL, there are two apps. One is Palo Alto Panorama or Zscaler. So I know this is configured with the Zscaler web proxy, so I will choose the Zscaler, and then I will simply click the launch. So clicking the launch, I see the activity has been executed. User initiated block URL action. I see the results as well. The has been updated as blocked on the web proxy server. Yes, so this is how you will execute actions on the artifacts. So within few minutes, within a few minutes, I could able to quickly typically, right. Okay, I think the issue with my network. I think yeah, it's the same. Okay, so so I was saying that within a few minutes, I could able to quickly do a URL investigation for the reputation, and I can see the maliciousness of that URL, and then I can simply block it. So this is how saying that still I manually initiated the action, but now let's look at how we can completely automate the process. For that, I want to take you all through the playbooks. So playbooks is nothing but human codification of a repeatable process. So we know a process, and if we want that to be repetitive, recurring, we can create a simple playbook. We can define the process in the playbook so that it does all of it rather than the effort that the SOC analyst will be spending. Here, when I create a playbook, there are two options that I see. So one, automation. Automation means this playbook can run on its own. It doesn't require any input. So in Splunk SOAR, you can build a master playbook and child playbook. For master playbooks, based on the inputs, if you want to run a child playbook, then you will create an input. For this example, we'll go with automation. Okay, so when you open a playbook, create a new playbook, this is what you see. You will see the start and end block. On the left, you can able to see some of the actions. So action is where you can, where the apps are integrated and you can run different actions. And if you want to call a child playbook, you can use a playbook action. If you want to create a custom code, you can use this custom code block. Or if you want to add some utilities, for example, there is an event already ingested into SOAR. And if you want to make any status change, like for example, if you want to change the owner or if you want to change the status, severity, you can use the utility block. And there are some other processing blocks as well, like filter. If you want to filter the data, for example, there's a container. The container has multiple artifacts that what we saw, right? So multiple artifacts, URL, domain, file, everything. And if you want to pass only certain artifacts to your downstream blocks, you can use a filter block. And there's a decision block. So if you run an action based on the status or result, if you want to determine some decision-making logic, you can use the decision block. Format blocks are used to format the data, kind of string manipulation. For example, if you want to send an email, what is the message that you want to have in the email? So those things you can do it with a format block. Finally, the prompt. The prompt is nothing but it's a human response. So at this stage, the playbook will be passed and it will pop up for a notification where you can look out for the response. Based on response, the downstream block will execute. Okay, so now for the time being, an example, we will try to automate the same actions that we did manually previously. First, I will go with creating an action. So I can quickly go to the by action. I can type for URL reputation. Yeah. One more good thing, I want to highlight here about Splunk SOAR, especially is that all the API implementation and the actions are standardized across the apps. What I mean is that you can type for URL reputation and you can see what all the other apps perform the same actions. So I think this is something different with other SOAR tools where you may need to memorize the asset informations to configure. So this is one way of consistent in your playbook development. Here I want to use a virus total, and then I want to pass the URL. I know, based on the container information, the artifact is present under the request URL parameter. So I will configure this. Okay, so now we are doing the reputation for the URL. Based on the reputation, I want to make some decision making logic. I want to add a decision block. Here, I want to assess the summary risk, the positives. So what I will do, I will just click on the parameter. So here I will click on the parameter. It should show the previous block's action result, like URL reputation. Here I will assess the positiveness of that specific positiveness of the malicious URL. Simply, for example, you might be looking at different tools and technologies, virus total, fish tank, abuse IP for checking the maliciousness and positive hit. Similarly, I'm having a decision block which will check whether summary positive hit is greater than equal to some value. For example, I will give one. You can change the threshold as well as more than 2, 3, 4, depending upon the requirement and accurateness that you want to bring for a true positive incident. Then, based on the threshold condition and decision block, I want to now execute another action, which is blocking the IP. So I will filter out to block IP, and I can see the apps, which is Zscaler. Now I need to enter the parameter, which I need to block the IP. So this is basically, I want to block this IP from the URL request parameter. So it's basically, where this is, okay, it's not reflecting. Let me pull that again. So we'll go with the action. We'll choose the Zscaler, block IP. And here in the inputs, we see the URL reputation, and we want to block this URL, right? So we will choose this URL, and then we will end the playbook. This is it. This is the process, what we did manually. Now we are trying to automate it. And finally, there are a few settings that you need to do. First, you need to input the name of the playbook. So I will do check URL and block demo. And then there are some other settings like, on what events that you want this playbook to be executed. As I already, informed that, labels is very important for the playbook execution. So we want to run this playbook against the email label. We will choose email, and we will do active. Active means whenever there is a new event getting ingested, this playbook will automatically run for performing the automation and remediation process. So now we have the playbook built. Now let's see how we can run this playbook against the same event. We will run this playbook against the same event where we executed or initiated the actions manually to see how the playbook is doing the.
Just a quick time check also, Vikesh. Sorry, I think we're already at the end of the hour. So there might be folks who are going to, who might need to drop off. So for those who need to drop off, thank you for joining. We will share the deck with you after this call. If you have questions also, of course, please do feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, in the meantime, I think Vikesh needs to complete, I guess, his flow. So I'll let him do that. But thank you so much for everyone who's joining. If you have a few minutes, please do stay back for the conclusion of Vikesh's demo. But if you have any questions, of course, do feel free to reach out to us on email. Vikas will be sharing the deck shortly with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Sorry,
yeah. So now that we have developed a playbook and we are running against the same container. So previously we executed these actions manually. This is a very simple scenario. We can able to do the automation here. So we can also build a sophisticated playbook based on your requirement. So this is the example that I want to show in this demo. So I will also show you a sophisticated phishing, a real-world phishing playbook. And what is the process involved in the playbook. So let me quickly, considering the time, I'll just quickly pass through this, and we can wind up this demo session as well. So it's getting loaded. So this is a real world phishing example that we want to use. We are starting the playbook with a reputation. We are doing file reputation, URL reputation, and domain reputation. Based on the positive hit for these reputations, we will do two actions. One, we want to find the we want to detonate the file, meaning that you want to see what is happening with that file or a URL by running or executing this in a confined or controlled environment. So we call it a sandbox. We'll have a sandbox environment where we will just execute the operation of that URL or domain to see what happens. And based on the score, we will also gather additional information like hunting the file, getting a screenshot of that URL, what happens next, and then we'll get some system information, and finally we'll do the blocking of URL. So once these investigations are done, we will have a human prompt here. This human prompt, basically what it does is that it will inform the analyst saying that this investigation has been done. Do you want to proceed to block the URL and delete the email from the senders or inbox or users inbox mailbox? So based on the decision, it will proceed by deleting the phishing email. This is one of the real world example or playbook that you can build one for your organization for counteracting the phishing investigation rather than spending manual effort going through the similar process again and again. So I think considering the time, I think I will stop here. Apologies for taking more than an hour. So yes, I will stop the demo here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take. Okay, I have a question from Dinup. Is there a limitation in Splunk SOAR for playbook actions? So the actions depends upon the license that you procure. So in Splunk, they offer a seat-based license and events-based license. If you go for seat-based license, basically the number of users, you will get unlimited actions. That's how the playbook execution actions works in Splunk SOAR. So if you go with the enterprise license, there is definitely not any limitation on the actions. For the beginners who wants to take a look into the hands-on feel on the Splunk SOAR platform, you can download a community version with which you can run 100 actions per day.
Good. Thank you so much, Vikesh, for taking the demo. Thank you for everyone who's still there. And we hope you learned, you found the session to be informative, that you learned something to take away. If you need to reach out, as I said, Vikash will be sharing the deck shortly. If you have questions, if you want to engage in more detail, do feel free to reach out. Thank you again for your time, and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone. Thank